the next 2 weeks, I want to talk a little bit about the Constitution of the United States and how it was formed, where it was when it was formed, and what the meaning really was, and where we are today. And in order to really talk about it, we need to talk about how it all came about. Most people think that you say, when was the Constitution of the United States signed? Most people will say 1776. That's not true. The Constitution of the United States was not signed until 1777, which was 11 years later. And because it started out after the Declaration of Independence, there was a lot of work done by the different states. Some of them formed their own constitution, and in 1776, 10 years later, George Washington called together a constitutional meeting to have people to bring their thoughts and put everything together. During that time, a lot of people wrote a lot of papers called the Federalist Papers. I've got a book here that has the Federalist Papers of Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. Most of you don't know who John Jay is because we never heard much about him, but he wrote some very important things toward our Constitution. Hamilton looked at his papers, primarily looked at men, what our thoughts are, what men's thoughts are about things that how greedy we can get, how things can happen. The things that we see in Washington, his Federalist Papers pretty well describe those, and the things that he suggested to prevent that from happening. And the basic thing about the Constitution, I've taken a couple of seminars and also read a lot of books. This is a very good book. If you wanted to get a book and read it, it's really easy to read. It's a really good book. It's called The 5,000 Year League. It's actually, in the top of it says, a miracle that changed the world. The Constitution of the United States changed the world. It really did. It made a change in the world. The reason, there's two major events that have taken place in history that have changed the world as far as mankind is concerned. The first and most important one was when Jesus Christ came. The second one was when the United States formed the Constitution of the United States. There's been more accomplished through that than any other thing that's ever happened, and we're about, in my opinion, about to lose it. I want to back up just a second, talking about last week a little bit, the CO2 thing, the deal that they're trying to do right now to get rid of fossil fuel. They call it the Green New Deal. I told James this morning that's a misname for sure, because if you do away with all the CO2, nothing will be green anymore.
That's right.
That's right.
Because CO2 actually forms the chlorophyll that makes things turn green. Trees actually absorb about 100 pounds of CO2 during the blooming, when their foliage is out and everything else. They absorb it. When their leaves fall off in the wintertime, they use that CO2 to feed themselves, to feed the tree, keep it alive and all this, and make the chlorophyll and everything that they need to bloom out in the spring. So, that's a misnomer. We're talking about CO2 being that. And as I said, there's a balance in nature. I could tell you some things that probably would, I wish we had some engineers here tonight, because actually 1 bolt of lightning will make more CO2 than all of the cars in Smith County will produce in a year's time.
Let's see him stop lightning.
Yeah, it is. And the other thing is, God made this thing. I don't know how He created it all. I hope that when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask some questions.
Yeah.
We talk about the hurricane. a hurricane swirling, they're gonna get feet of rain. That rain, that pulls the ocean up into the clouds, and it rains on the earth. That ocean has 3.5% of the ocean, the water is salt. It's very hard. I mean, it's water, ocean water will kill you. It's got so much salt in it. But when it rains, it blows it up in the air, goes into the clouds, and rains it out 100 miles inland, and it's just as pure as it can be. Boy, it's a good desalting system, isn't it?
Wow.
Stop and think about it. We have desalting systems all over the world now, taking water and making it into pure water for people to drink and pure water for people to use. Boy, God can do it, and it costs billions of dollars to build a desalting plant that'll make 20 million gallons of water a day. God can put 20 million gallons a minute out, and it doesn't cost anything extra. You know, scientists can't explain that, but it does. It happens, and that's what we're talking about in the balance of nature. But one of the things that I wanted to start out with today is, like I said, is to talk about the Constitution, the forming of the Constitution. I want to talk a little bit about the Federalist Papers. See how many people we got here now? 2, 4, 6, 8. Oh, we got plenty. I got plenty of these. I got 3 different handouts. I'm going to hand one out right now. I'm going to get the others out as we go. But in the Federalist Papers, there were several things written. In this book, one of the first papers that I've read about the people that wrote the papers to form the Constitution. One of the ones that we all know is George Washington. George Washington. Let me double check my numbers here right quick. In the Federalist Papers, George Washington gave credit to God 61 times. 61 times in his recitation or his writings, he gave credit to God 61 times. Of all the writers of the Constitution, God was given credit for their writings 817 times.
Man.
If you go through all the Federalist Papers, 817 times they gave God the credit. I mentioned, I think last week, that if you read through the Bible and what you see there, let me have one of those back.
They're right there.
I can use it here. If you take the children of Israel to begin with, when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, he started out, he was the boss. It tells us that in Exodus. He ran it all. And there's in Exodus 18:13. By the way, when I start reading something here, if it sounds like I'm stumbling around, if I get to going trying to read it too fast, I'll stumble, because I read 15,000 or 1,500 words a minute. And if I try to read it, I can't talk as fast as I read. So sometimes if I get to reading and I don't watch my speed, I'm reading three rows below where I'm talking. So sometimes I have trouble doing that. So I do my best when I read something to a group like this. I try to slow it way down. So it's not because I'm a slow reader. It's because I have to slow down so I can talk as fast as I'm reading. But anyway, the Bible actually says, Exodus 18:13 says that Moses found it impossible to govern the people effectively under this system. If you look up above, it's got a list of things that Moses was responsible for. And it talks about it talks about the agriculture, the bartering, the census, the clothing, the complaints, the construction, the crafts. It goes into everything he was responsible for. Now he was a godly man. He was led by God, so he was not an emperor that was trying to make himself great or taking credit for it himself. But he found out, as a single leader, it was almost impossible to do the job. And if you go over into Numbers and you do the numbers on the generations in Numbers, you find that there was at least 3 million people that he was leading. Can you imagine one man trying to lead 3 million people? But anyway, it says that he was from morning to night, all day, whatever. He had questions and he had conflicts he was trying to solve and all this. Well, I believe the Bible tells us that his father-in-law told him, said, look, you can't do that. So I want you to pass out this next group of papers. I keep those papers. It does give you the Bible references. But if you take this next one, you're going to find that he formed an organization to lead the children of Israel. And he said, okay, the people are going to, here's the way we're going to set it up. He said, Aaron is the vice president of internal affairs. That's modern language now.
There you go.
He said that the vice president of military is Joshua. All of us have heard of Aaron and Joshua. Then he had a council of 70 people. That's in the Bible. He had an elected representative, that people elected some people. And then he had he had 600 groups of 1,000 families. He had 6,000 groups of 100 families, and 12,000 groups of 50 families, and 60,000 groups of 10 families. More than 600,000 families, more than 3 million people with power to govern themselves. Now, what the Federalist people, when all the Federalist people papers were put together, they determined that the best government, the best way to adhere to the laws was for each individual to be responsible for himself. If you educate and you know and you take responsibility for where you are and what you do, then the rest of it gets a lot easier. You know, we're living in a world today where we have a very litigious society. You know, if you walk out across somebody's yard, you trip over a rope or something that's out there, then, oh, we're going to sue them people because I broke my knee, I broke my leg, whatever. When I was growing up, I went home and said I went over to Brother James's yard and I fell over a rope he had in the backyard. My mother would say, well, why didn't you watch where you were going?
Yep.
That's the truth.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, it wasn't that she didn't care for me. She was saying, take responsibility for what you do, boy. You got an arm hurt, you got a leg hurt or something, it was your fault. And that is the principle that they used. They said, okay, teach the people, educate the people, let them know what it is. Make people responsible for themselves, period. Now there's some people that need help, I'm not arguing that. But if they're responsible for themselves, then it's the right thing for we as church members and we as believers and we as Christians to go help the people that need help, that truly need help, and to do the right thing. So what Moses did, he said, okay, I'm going to teach you what God tells us to do. God's taking care of you. You know the laws of nature. You worked in Egypt for the last 400 years, I believe it was, wasn't it? You work, you know what God created, you know what God is, you know where it is. We're going to make you responsible for yourselves. Now, if there's problems that come up, you've got this group of people here that, you know, the smaller group that you can go to. If that doesn't satisfy you, you've got a larger group, and then you've got a larger group. And then, when it finally, if it has to come to the top of the mountain, you've got the vice president of internal affairs. You know, whatever you gotta do, I mean, first of all, most of the problems then were settled very easily before it got up to the top. He didn't have to go to the top. Now, that was the way that Moses set up to handle the children of Israel with God's leading. And I made the statement last week that when you look at this, one of the Federalist paper writers, I think it was John Jay, said that actually setting this up is setting it up like the Trinity. You have the top man, which is God himself, and I said last week, that's not it. I'm sure not calling Trump God. Don't take that away. But then you have the council, which is the Congress, and then you have the judicial, which is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is there to interpret the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. There's one thing that everybody get that second paper?
Yes.
Okay. So what actually happened if you look at the two papers is you turn the pyramid upside down. Right? That's what you actually did. And if you look at the next paper, this one shows the federal government. I want to pass this one out. This will be the one behind it.
First?
But anyway, you see, what I'm handing you is the second organization that Moses came up with that actually worked. And I want to touch on some issues, some very important things that are in the Constitution that. She's passing those out. Now, when the Constitution was established and written, and everybody ought to, at some point, the Constitution is not an easy read. People talk about it being, you need to read the Constitution and all. It's not really an easy read. You have to go back and look at it and see what it's for some of it's written in Old English and things that are a little difficult to read. But if you read it, when they got all the papers together and they wrote the Constitution, first of all, it had to be voted by the Congress at that time. And if they had because of the lack of states and the lack of representatives, it had to pass by a three-fourths vote in order to be instituted. And they were very concerned because one state had 10 votes and other states had 1 or 2 votes, similar to what we do now with the Electoral College. If one of those states, or 1 or 2 of those states had voted against it, it wouldn't have passed. But the original writing of the Constitution, it was written using the Federalist Papers, passed 100%. Every representative that was there voted for it. Not all the representatives were there. Back in those days, they didn't pay them to come. Back in those days, they had to get there on their own. They had to pay their own expenses, and they were only coming one time a year. By the way, the tax law wasn't instituted until 1919 was the first time they came up with the income tax law. So they started make us start paying. That up until right before then, they did get to where the states were paying their travel expenses and all that, but they didn't get paid to be congressmen. They didn't get paid to be senators. They certainly didn't have the right to vote themselves a raise. So there's part of the problem. But when they went after Congress passed the Constitution of the United States, next week I want us to get into the Constitution and talk about it some. But after they passed the Constitution, the states all looked at it, the different states. Some of them had their own constitution. They compared it to their own constitution. When they were operating under the original federations that they had in the states themselves, they began to argue among themselves and where my territory is and where's your territory and all this. So they really saw the need for a general constitution that covered all the states combined. The original writings, the original things that they established were good in a lot of states, but they conflicted one another from time to time. So to get rid of the conflicts, they went ahead and said, we gotta have a constitution that works for everybody. When they sent the constitution that was passed by Congress to the states, after they studied it, they came back with 15 Bill of Rights. There were things in there that they added to cover their own needs, to cover their own things. They actually came back with 19 or 20, but then after it was discussed with the Congress and all, they reduced it to 15. And the First Amendment, I want to read the First Amendment to you, at least part of it. It said the First Amendment begins with these words: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The founders had already declared in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that religion should be taught in schools. But they did not want the government backing any particular establishment of religion, that is, the creed and ritual of any particular church. Because when they were in England, England wanted the Church of England, everybody had to be a member of the Church of England. So they used the term religion in the broadest sense, meaning the basic beliefs in which practically all mankind agree. According to Franklin and others of the founders, these basic beliefs are that the Creator has revealed a moral code which defines what is right and what is wrong. That the Creator holds mankind responsible for the way they treat each other. We're talking about God. All mankind live beyond this life. Did you get that? All mankind live beyond this life. They all agreed on that. And the last thing they said was, in the next life, individuals are judged by the Creator for their conduct in this one. Wow. Isn't that pretty sound doctrine?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how in the world, and our motto in this country, our motto is, in God we trust. The seal of the United States has the eagle and everything on the front of it. If you make a coin like they make, they have one with something on the back. You know what's on the back? It's the same thing that's on one of the bills. I forget which bill it is. $10 bill, $5 bill. One of them that has the looks like the pyramid and the numbers on the bottom and the eye on the top and all that. I know some of you probably heard all kinds of stuff about what that means. The Masons. I'm not ashamed of it. I am a Mason. I'm a 32nd degree Mason. I support all the hospitals and all the things that they do and all the good that they do. There may be some that are off in left field, I don't know about those. All I've ever been in are good Christian people. As long as I know it's right, I feel comfortable in doing it. But if you read through this book and some of the other books that are here and study Federalist Papers, the writing on the bottom of the pyramid simply says it's actually just the date of when the Constitution was signed. The Pluribus Unum, that just simply means that all of us act as one. And the eye that's up there is the all-seeing eye of God watching what people do. Doesn't have anything to do with any kind of whatever. But that's the interpretation that's in all the books that I've read. Except those that have got these theories. I've learned in my lifetime, I've learned one thing. And I don't say this, I've done a lot of things in my life that I shouldn't have done. I probably read a lot of stuff I shouldn't have even read. But I try to read both sides of all the issues. I read the things that I believe in, things I don't believe in. I like to see it all the way. And if you go to my house right now, my ever thing in my house is covered with books because I read all the time. I've been reading since I was 14 years old. I read a lot of books, read a lot of things. But I believe that reading, when people put something in writing, it has more weight to me than what they say on TV or whatever they're trying to propose otherwise. Because if you put it in writing, if it's wrong, you can be sued for putting things in there that are wrong. Certainly nowadays. So I think that in most cases, what you read in some of the books and all are fairly accurate. I believe in what I read. I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail here, but anyway, there's a lot of things going on in the world today. First of all, Brother James said this morning that they were burning Bibles in some of them in Oregon. I believe it was Oregon, wasn't it? And Portland. Yeah. And you know, where we took the religion out of schools in 1960, banned the reading of the Bible and all in the school, the prayer in school in 1960. And if you look at it, our morals went from a level here to the level here in the next 25 to 30 years. We lost the morals in our country. Now then, we're destroying all the history. We're destroying all the things. Folks, if we as Christians don't step up and begin to talk about where we are. I'm not a prophet of doom. I believe that God can take control of it, whatever it is. And I think God is in control of it, whatever it is. But I believe that He wants Christian believers to step up and do their part. You know, I don't think, when it comes to financing and things like that, it's the same way in our churches and all, I've never seen God print any money. He uses people. He uses people to promote things. He uses people to spread the gospel. If God Himself talked to everybody on earth and spread the Bible, then we wouldn't need Brother James over here. So God uses people, and we need to. I just turned 80 years old, and I'm a lot braver than I was when I was 20. I am. I mean it. People say things to me today, and I come back and say, no, that's not what God said. That's against the law of nature. That can't happen anymore. And I don't mind saying that. One of the things is some people look at me and say, well, what do you mean? Well, it's just not. It's not right. I believe we need to speak up. The founders of this country believed in God. This country was established on God's godly principles, and we've lost it. You know, there's I was reading, I don't even know where I saw this, they just came to my mind. Y'all know what a terrapin is?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, yeah.
You know, we called them all, you know what a terrapin is? Yeah. You know what a terrapin post is?
Yeah.
Ever heard that statement, terrapin post? You know, most of our regulators, most of the people we got in Washington, they're terrapin posts. If you ever go down the road and you see a terrapin on top of a post, first of all, you know he didn't get there by himself.
Oh.
Second place is he's somewhere where he shouldn't be. You don't know what to do about it. And the next thing you think is, what idiot put him up there to begin with? And that's a politician. That describes it pretty well, really does. You know, we're living in a society today where good Christian people don't want to go to Congress anymore. How would you like to be in Trump's place?
Oh, no.
Wow.
Oh, no.
I mean, he's his own worst enemy, some of the things he says.
Oh, yeah.
But I believe that God is doing some things through him. And I'm beginning to think that he's the only crass enough, brave enough kind of person that God could use to do what needs to be done up there today. I'm talking politics a little bit here now. And I know Trump breaks his arm every day trying to pat himself on the back. I understand that. But I believe that he's God's man for this time. We need some things to change. Unless the Lord's coming next week, we need some things done.
Amen.
And that's where we are. I gave you some papers here. I'd like for you to read it. It does reference the Bible and some of the things that they're saying here. It also talks about some of the Federalist papers and whatever. And the total Federalist papers that were written, this is just 3 men. The total Federalist papers that were written, I'd have to read 3 Bibles to read them all. I have read them all. But there's no way you can cover that in a few meetings like this at night, and it'd bore you to death. I don't want to do that. But basically, I've given you the basic founding of our Constitution tonight. And I would like next week for us to get into some detail and talk about it and explain some things like I did the First Amendment there just now. That should be taught in schools. We should be teaching the First Amendment in schools.
They used to.
And,
I had all that in civics.
now we did
They don't.
have it, but they don't now.
Now, wow.
They don't teach it now. It should be taught in schools, and it
They
should
try
be taught to our children.
Yeah, well, they try to say since it's open, religion, it's not specifically Baptist, that if they teach one, they have to teach all of them. And so teachers just say, I don't wanna teach all the different religions, cause I don't wanna get involved, so they just don't do it.
Well, one of the excuses that they use, and one of the excuses that Christians use, I've heard this from Christians. Well, if we had prayer in school, they could teach Muslim belief in schools and all the other stuff. I don't care. The majority of the United States are Christians.
That's right.
They profess to be Christians. 80% of the population of the United States professes to be Christians. If some teacher wants to teach the Muslim religion, I guess they have the right to do that. But if we, as Christians, speak up and do our part, then that religion isn't going to go very far. But we talk about Baptist, Methodist, Assembly of God, all the other religions that are out there. All of those religions believe in Jesus Christ, Him crucified, and rising again, and dying for our sins. They know the basics. I mean, my wife says we're Methodist Baptist Pentecostal or something like that. Baptist Baptist or something like that, because we've been to all of them one time or the other. And we've been to the non-denominational church. The point is, it's not the name that's on the building out
That's
there.
right.
It's the belief that's in the heart. And what has happened to this country, we've gotten to the place where God didn't do it. We did it. And I'm gonna tell you, when we get to the point where we think we did it, we're in trouble. I've made the point several times. I don't say this, I'm not bragging, I don't mean bragging. I think I have 37 patents and I've never created anything. I've just taken something, put it together and make it work better. Ask me where those thoughts came from, a lot of times I don't even know. I saw something in my work, I figured something out and tried to do it. I can tell you things that I've done, some of you wouldn't even understand it, wouldn't even know what I was talking about. I don't know how I got there. One thing you might know, if you drive on the highway, how many of you seen the little round button on the highway you run over? One's got the lights in them. Look that up in the patent book. You're gonna find my name's on that patent.
Wow.
I designed the first one of those that ever put on the road. I sold it to American Clay Forming Company in Tyler, Texas, and they started making them, and I set a company up to start installing them on the highway, and we came up with a way of putting them down, the whole business. But when I formed that company, I took on a partner, and that partner of mine wanted to pay off the people in the government and everything else to get the contracts and all that, and I said, no, I can't do that, and I wound up selling my half of it to him when it was just a very small company, and I got out of it. By the way, he went to the penitentiary for 5 years. Do I regret it? Financially, it cost me money. But I'm proud of what I did. And but anyway, I could tell you stories up here forever. But I hope that you look at what I gave you tonight and read the things that go along with it. If you want more information, I've got a really good book here. If you want further information, I can tell you where to get this book. You might be like some of my grandkids that don't want to read much, so if you don't want to do that, that's okay too. But we'll talk next time. Next Sunday, I want us to go into some of the important parts of the Constitution so that we have a better understanding of actually what it says. Before I quit, I've got one more thing that I'm going to try to read to you here. The principles that they formed the Constitution after writing the Federalist Papers, they came up with 28 principles. It's pretty short, it's not a long deal. We'll do this, I'll be through. It said, number one, the only reliable basis for sound government and just human relations is natural law. A free people cannot survive under a constitution unless they remain virtuous and morally strong. The most promising method of securing a virtuous and moral stable people is to elect virtuous people, virtuous leaders. Without religion, the government of a free people cannot be maintained. All things were created by God, therefore upon him all mankind are equally dependent, and to him they are equally responsible. All men are created equal. The proper role of government is to protect equal rights, not provide equal things.
Amen.
Yeah.
Men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable unalienable rights. To protect men's rights, God has revealed certain principles of divine law. The God-given right to govern is vested in the sovereign authority of the whole people. The majority of the people may alter or abolish a government which has become tyrannical. The United States of America shall be a republic. The Constitution should be structured to permanently protect the people from human frailties of their rulers. And that's the thing that Hamilton talked about so much. There's a lot of frailty in people, and especially when they get in a place of power and they think they become greater than somebody else. Life and liberty are secured only so long as the right of property is secured. The highest level of prosperity occurs when there is a free market economy and a minimum of government regulations. The government should be separated into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The system of checks and balances should be adopted to prevent the abuse of power. The unalienable rights of people are most likely to be preserved if the principles of government are set forth in a written constitution. Only limited and careful divine powers should be delegated to government, all others being retained in the people. Efficiency to dispatch required government to operate according to the will of the majority, but constitutional provision must be made to protect the rights of the minority. Strong local government is the keystone to preserving human freedom. A free people should be governed by law and not by whims of men. A free society cannot survive as a republic without a broad program of general education. A free people will not survive unless they stay strong. Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. The core unit which determines the strength of any society is the family. Therefore, the government should foster and protect its integrity. Family integrity. The burden of debt is as destructive to freedom as subjugation to conquest. The United States has a manifest destiny to be the example and a blessing to the entire human race.
Wow.
Those are the 28 principles. And I believe that they did the best job that they could do to include all of those principles. We can talk about some of those next week. Hope you look at what's there and just think about it a little bit. First of all, remember that God, the Bible, natural law, had a very, very big part in establishing this country that we live in today. And it's important that we keep it. I just finished a book written by last justice that we got, Kavanaugh. Rick Kavanaugh just wrote a book. The title of it is what Benjamin Franklin said when he came out of the meeting. They asked him what kind of government we had. He said, it's a republic if we can keep it. And that's the title of the book. It's a republic if we can keep it. Kavanaugh just wrote it. And he expands a little bit on some of the things that was done when he was being voted on, the thing that happened. 99% of the stuff they brought up against him was just a pack of lies.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's pitiful that it's that way, folks. And we probably look around and you say, well, there's 12 people here tonight or whatever it is. I don't remember how many I counted. 10 or 12 of us here tonight. We can't do anything. You can start here.
Yes, you can.
You can start with our prayers. You can start by educating ourselves, and it can start by stepping out, talking about it, and it can start by voting.
Yeah.
I'm through.
Amen.